The morning sun glimmered against the glass windows of the courthouse, casting long streaks of gold across the marble floors. The building stood tall and proud, its very walls whispering of justice, history, and the countless stories that had unfolded within. Inside those doors, people entered with hope, fear, or determination. Among them was a young man, his steps brisk and full of purpose. He was a rookie lawyer, freshly out of law school, dressed in a sharp navy blue suit that he had spent more than he could afford on. His shoes gleamed, his hair was slicked back neatly, and his leather briefcase swung at his side as though it carried the weight of destiny. This was his day. His moment. His first major case in front of an experienced judge. He had spent nights rehearsing his arguments in front of the mirror, watching himself smile, gesture, and speak with perfect confidence. He wanted the world to see him as brilliant, untouchable, destined for greatness. And in his mind, there was no room for doubt. As he walked up the courthouse steps, he ignored the others struggling to climb them. Older citizens with weak knees, parents juggling children, and clerks carrying stacks of files. To him, they were invisible, part of the background of his stage. He held his head high, chest puffed out, telling himself he belonged here more than anyone else. Inside the lobby, the air buzzed with voices. Lawyers in black robes shuffled through, whispering strategies to one another. Clients clutched documents with trembling hands, waiting for their turn. And there she sat, an elderly black woman on one of the wooden benches near the entrance. Her hair was gray, tied neatly in a bun. Her dress was plain, a faded blue, and she held a small handbag in her lap. She sat quietly, her posture straight, her eyes calm and observant. The rookie noticed her almost immediately, but not in admiration. His lips curled into a smirk. To him, she didn't look like anyone of importance. She didn't carry herself like a lawyer or a judge. She wasn't surrounded by clerks or assistants. In his arrogance, he assumed she was simply another uneducated woman who had wandered into the wrong place. He scoffed under his breath, thinking, what business does someone like her have here? He adjusted his tie and strutted further into the hall, making sure people saw him. He spoke loudly to a colleague, bragging about his preparations, dropping legal terms he barely understood, hoping to sound impressive. He wanted eyes on him, respect directed at him. And in that moment he believed that respect was something owed to him, not something earned. Every detail of his behavior revealed his arrogance. When a clerk accidentally brushed against his arm, he snapped, "Watch where you're going." When another lawyer offered a polite nod, he ignored it, believing only seasoned attorneys deserved his attention. And when his gaze fell back on the elderly woman sitting alone, he chuckled to himself. He couldn't resist making a remark. Walking past her bench, he leaned slightly and muttered, loud enough for others nearby to hear, "Courthouse isn't a place for nap time, Grandma. Best not get lost in here." Some people nearby frowned at his disrespect, but the woman didn't flinch. She simply looked up at him with steady, calm eyes. Her gaze wasn't angry nor was it weak. It was the look of someone who had seen arrogance before, someone who knew time itself would teach him lessons far harsher than words. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence carried more weight than any insult could. The rookie smirked again, mistaking her quiet for ignorance. He straightened his shoulders, whispered to another young lawyer, "Some people just don't belong here," and walked away feeling proud of himself as though he had won some invisible battle. What he didn't know was that his words had already betrayed him. People had noticed. A few lawyers shook their heads, unimpressed. A clerk muttered to herself about his lack of manners. But the rookie didn't see any of it. His pride blinded him to the way others judged him silently. He was too focused on his own reflection in the polished glass doors, where he practiced his confident smile one more time before stepping into the courtroom. In his mind, this day would prove his brilliance. He imagined the judge praising his argument, clients admiring his skill, and colleagues whispering about his talent. He thought he would walk out of the courthouse with his reputation sealed as a rising star. But fate was watching. And fate has a way of humbling those who fly too close to their own pride. The elderly woman adjusted her handbag on her lap, her calm eyes following him as he disappeared into the courtroom. She knew the truth he didn't. Appearances mean nothing in a place where justice speaks louder than arrogance. She remained silent, patient, waiting for the moment when the mask of his pride would be ripped away. For now, the rookie lawyer believed this was his stage, his world, his triumph. But soon, very soon, he would learn that respect is not commanded by loud words or sharp suits. It is earned through humility, wisdom, and honor. This ordinary morning was about to turn into the most extraordinary lesson of his young career. The courthouse clock ticked steadily, its echo filling the grand lobby. Lawyers hurried past with thick case files, clients whispered nervously with their families, and clerks shuffled paperwork from one desk to another. It was a place of order, a place where appearances often spoke louder than words. And in the middle of that chaos, the elderly black woman sat quietly on the wooden bench, her hands folded neatly over her handbag. She wasn't restless, nor did she try to force herself into conversations. She simply sat with an air of patience, her eyes calm, watching the world move around her. The rookie lawyer noticed her again as he paced the hall, reviewing his notes for the upcoming case. His polished shoes clicked loudly against the marble, and his freshly ironed suit glimmered beneath the lobby lights. He loved the attention his presence drew. People glanced his way, some curious, some indifferent. He assumed they were impressed, and that assumption fed his pride like fuel to a flame. But every time his eyes fell on the elderly woman, irritation pricked at him. She was too composed, too steady. She didn't look nervous like the clients, nor busy like the clerks. To him, she looked out of place, like a misplaced figure in an otherwise perfect setting. He frowned, wondering why she was there at all. He finally walked closer, unable to resist testing his arrogance once more. "You waiting for someone, ma'am?" he asked, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Or did you lose your way?" Her gaze lifted slowly, meeting his eyes with quiet strength. "I'm exactly where I need to be," she said, her voice soft but steady. The rookie chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. "Well, I hope you find the right courtroom. They can be confusing for people, especially if you've never been in one before." His words dripped with condescension, his smile sharp and cruel. She didn't respond to his mockery. Instead, she studied him for a moment, as though she could see past his polished appearance, past the rehearsed confidence in his voice, straight into the insecurity he buried beneath it. Then she nodded once and said, "Courtrooms aren't confusing, son. People are." The rookie blinked, momentarily thrown off. But pride wouldn't let him show weakness. He laughed and stepped back. "Interesting. Maybe you should share that wisdom with someone who cares." He turned to walk away, but her words lingered, tugging faintly at something inside him he didn't want to acknowledge. Other people in the lobby had been watching, their eyes flicking between the two. A clerk muttered under her breath, "He doesn't know who she is." A bailiff shook his head slightly, disgusted at the young man's tone. But the rookie didn't notice. He was too wrapped up in his own self-importance, convinced the entire room existed to applaud his brilliance. As the minutes passed, he returned to the bench more than once, pretending to glance at his notes but really checking on her. She sat unmoved, her patience unshaken. It bothered him. Why didn't she react to his ridicule? Why didn't she flinch, argue, or at least look embarrassed? In his world, arrogance was a weapon that made others shrink. But this woman didn't shrink. She simply endured, her silence louder than his words. "Strange," he muttered to himself, adjusting his tie. "She doesn't even fight back." At one point, a janitor walked by and greeted the elderly woman with respect. "Good morning, ma'am," he said warmly. She nodded and smiled, her expression kind. The rookie frowned again. Why were others treating her with such courtesy? In his mind she was nobody. Yet there was a quiet reverence in the way people acknowledged her. He ignored it, chalking it up to pity. When the bailiff finally called for cases to begin, the rookie gathered his files and strode proudly toward the courtroom doors. He was ready to perform, to impress, to make this day his stage. But just as he stepped inside, he heard the sound of the elderly woman's footsteps behind him. Slow, steady, unhurried. She too was entering the same courtroom. He turned slightly, his brow furrowed. "You sure you're in the right place, ma'am?" he asked again, smirking. "This isn't a gallery tour. This is serious business." The woman gave him the faintest of smiles, her eyes calm and knowing. "I know exactly where I belong," she replied. Her words, once again, carried a weight that unsettled him. But he brushed it off, whispering to himself as he took his seat, "She's just here to watch. Nothing more." What he didn't realize was that this simple encounter was only the beginning of his downfall. His arrogance had blinded him, but soon the truth would tear away that mask. The woman he mocked would not remain just a quiet figure on a bench. She was about to step into a role that would shake his pride to its very core. And the courtroom, filled with witnesses, would see it all unfold. The courtroom filled quickly, the air thick with tension and the quiet shuffle of papers. Lawyers whispered to their clients, clerks carried bundles of files, and the judge's bench loomed at the front like a throne of authority. The rookie lawyer adjusted his tie once more and slid into his seat, his confidence swelling as he prepared to impress. He had been dreaming of this day for months, His first chance to show everyone that he wasn't just another fresh face, but someone destined for greatness. He rehearsed his opening arguments silently, mouthing the words and watching the reactions of people nearby. He wanted them to see his sharp suit, his smooth manner, his professional aura. To him, it wasn't just about the case. It was about image, about making sure everyone in that room remembered his name. And then he noticed her again. The elderly black woman entered the courtroom, walking with slow, deliberate steps, her handbag held against her side. She didn't hurry, didn't glance nervously around like the others. She simply moved with quiet dignity, as if she had walked into such rooms 1,000 times before. She sat down in the front row of the audience seats, folding her hands in her lap, her eyes fixed calmly ahead. The rookie's lips curled into a smirk. There she is again, he thought, still pretending to belong. When the murmurs in the room dipped, he leaned over to the young paralegal sitting beside him. His voice was low but sharp enough to be overheard by others nearby. Can you believe that? Some people wander in here thinking they're part of the process. She probably thinks watching a trial will teach her law. The paralegal frowned slightly but said nothing. The rookie took that silence as agreement and pressed on. He glanced toward her and spoke louder this time, his words deliberately cruel. It's a shame they let anyone walk in and sit like they belong here. Makes the place look untidy. A few heads turned. A clerk at the back shifted uncomfortably. Even one of the bailiffs narrowed his eyes, but the rookie ignored them all. He was enjoying himself too much. The elderly woman, however, didn't flinch. She sat still, her posture regal, her expression unchanged. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was power, though the rookie was too blind to recognize it. Her calm irritated him even more. He wanted her to react, to show some embarrassment or anger. His arrogance demanded it. So he leaned back in his chair and laughed quietly, shaking his head as though she were the punchline of some private joke. I wonder if she even knows where she is, he said loudly enough for the row behind him to hear. Maybe she thought this was a waiting room for food stamps. The words landed heavily in the room. A few gasps escaped and the atmosphere shifted. Whispers spread, not in agreement but in disapproval. People exchanged glances, some shaking their heads at his audacity. The rookie noticed but convinced himself they were reacting to his wit. The elderly woman finally turned her head. She didn't glare or frown. Instead, she looked at him with steady, unshaken eyes that carried a depth he had never encountered. It was the kind of gaze that made time feel slower, that stripped away the noise of the room and left only the truth. The rookie met her eyes for a second, but the weight of that look unsettled him. He quickly looked away, scoffing to cover his discomfort. See? Not a word. Just stares. What's she even doing here? The whispers grew louder now. Some of the older attorneys exchanged knowing looks, their expressions hinting at something the rookie didn't understand. But arrogance deafened him to those clues. He was too busy congratulating himself for being bold, too blind to see he was digging his own grave. The judge's arrival silenced the courtroom. Everyone rose respectfully as the gavel struck once. The rookie straightened his back, eager to impress, his earlier mockery fueling his inflated sense of superiority. He thought this was his stage, his chance to shine. But in the corner of his vision, he saw the elderly woman, sitting quietly, her presence commanding more respect than all his loud words. Something about her composure unnerved him again, but he buried the feeling. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that the woman he had ridiculed, mocked and dismissed would soon stand revealed. And when the truth came out, his arrogance would not just collapse, it would be shattered in front of everyone he had hoped to impress. The gavel struck once more, and the courtroom fell into an expectant silence. The judge, a stern man with silver hair and sharp eyes, took his seat on the bench. His presence alone demanded respect. Everyone sat straighter, even those who moments ago had been whispering nervously. The rookie lawyer adjusted his tie once again, a faint smile tugging at his lips. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. His heart thudded with excitement as he organized his papers. He imagined himself delivering clever arguments, imagined the judge nodding in approval, imagined whispers of admiration sweeping through the gallery. In his mind, today would mark the beginning of his reputation as a brilliant lawyer. But while his thoughts raced with ambition, the elderly black woman remained still in the front row. She sat with an air of calm dignity, her hands folded neatly over her handbag. The rookie glanced at her and smirked once more. Still here? He thought. Let her watch. Maybe she'll learn how real professionals work. The clerk began calling cases. Lawyers stood and introduced themselves, voices firm and respectful. When it was his turn, the rookie rose quickly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Your Honor," he said with exaggerated confidence, representing the defense. He added a polite nod, but his tone carried more pride than humility. The judge looked at him briefly, expression unreadable, then shifted his gaze elsewhere. The rookie sat down, his ego bruised slightly but still holding strong. Then, something unexpected happened. The judge leaned forward, his eyes searching the gallery. His stern features softened, and to the rookie's surprise, a faint smile appeared. "Before we begin," the judge said, his voice carrying across the silent room, "I want to acknowledge someone very dear to me." The rookie frowned, confused. Judges rarely made personal remarks before proceedings. He glanced at the other lawyers who seemed unsurprised. Some even straightened their posture with respect. The judge continued, "In this courtroom today sits a woman who shaped my entire journey in law. A woman whose wisdom and guidance made me the man I am. Without her, I would not be standing here as your judge." His hand gestured toward the front row. "Please join me in recognizing my mentor, Mrs. Eleanor James." Every head in the room turned toward the elderly black woman. She stood slowly, her posture straight, her expression calm yet dignified. Applause filled the courtroom, not thunderous but genuine, respectful, heartfelt. Lawyers nodded, clerks smiled, and even the bailiffs joined in with quiet claps. The rookie froze. His blood ran cold. His mouth went dry. Mentor? His mind scrambled, replaying the last hour. The woman he had ridiculed in the lobby. The woman he had mocked for looking out of place. The woman he had laughed at, insulted, and dismissed as irrelevant, she was the judge's mentor? His chest tightened as the realization sank in. This wasn't just any elderly woman. This wasn't someone who didn't belong. This was the very person who had shaped the man holding his career in his hands. The judge looked at her with deep respect, his voice warm. "Mrs. James taught me that law is not about power or pride. It's about justice, fairness, and above all, humanity. Every young lawyer should learn from her example." The rookie felt his stomach twist painfully. The words struck him like blows, each one exposing the hollowness of his arrogance. His earlier laughter echoed in his own mind, mocking him now. "Courthouse isn't a place for nap time, Grandma." Maybe she thought this was a waiting room for food stamps. Shame burned his face. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, wishing he could disappear. The people around him were no longer indifferent. He saw the glances, some smirking at his discomfort, others shaking their heads at his disrespect. The room remembered his mockery. And now, everyone knew exactly whom he had mocked. The judge's eyes swept the room, finally settling on the rookie. His gaze was sharp, piercing, as though he knew everything that had happened before the trial began. The rookie dropped his eyes to his papers, suddenly unable to meet that stare. The case hadn't even started, but his performance was already crumbling. He had come to prove himself brilliant, but now he sat exposed, his arrogance unraveling in front of the very audience he had wanted to impress. And this was only the beginning. The applause faded into silence, but the weight of the moment lingered in the courtroom like an invisible force. The rookie lawyer sat stiff in his chair, his hands gripping the edge of his desk, his knuckles white. His ears rang with the judge's words, "She is my mentor." The woman he had ridiculed, dismissed, and laughed at, the same woman who had sat quietly through his mockery, was the very foundation of the judge's career. The judge leaned back in his chair, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Many of you here today see only the surface of law, papers, procedures, and arguments. But when I was young, I had the privilege of being guided by a woman who showed me that the law is not about arrogance, not about winning for the sake of pride, but about serving people with fairness." His voice carried with authority, yet it softened when he looked at the elderly woman. "Mrs. Eleanor James is the reason I pursued justice with heart instead of ego." The courtroom was silent except for the soft creak of benches as people shifted uncomfortably, their eyes moving from the judge to the woman and then, inevitably, toward the rookie lawyer. Some knew what had happened in the lobby, whispers already spreading like wildfire. Others pieced it together from the shame radiating off his face. The rookie's mind spun. He wanted to sink into the floor, to vanish, to escape the eyes that now seemed to burn holes through him. His arrogance had turned to ash in a matter of seconds. The judge continued, his voice steady. "When I was a young law student, Mrs. James told me something I will never forget. The law is only as strong as the compassion behind it. Without respect, it is nothing but words on paper." Those words shaped my career. They shaped the way I judge every case before me. He paused, letting the weight of the lesson hang in the air. And it pains me to see how quickly the next generation forgets it. The rookie's stomach nodded. He knew the words were directed at him, even if the judge hadn't named him outright. His ears burned, his throat dry. He glanced nervously at Mrs. James, who sat in quiet dignity, her hands still folded over her handbag. She had not spoken a word, yet her silence spoke louder than his hours of boasting. The judge's eyes turned directly toward the rookie. His gaze was sharp, cutting through the polished suit, the rehearsed confidence, the shallow pride. Respect, the judge said slowly, is not shown by fancy words or clever arguments. It is shown in how you treat those you believe are beneath you. And let me tell you this, no one in this courtroom is beneath anyone. The rookie's chest tightened. He lowered his head, ashamed, but it was too late. Everyone had seen. The bailiff, the clerks, the other lawyers, they all knew. His reputation, which he had dreamed of building today, was crumbling in front of them. Mrs. James finally spoke, her voice soft yet commanding. The young often confuse arrogance with confidence, she said, her eyes never leaving the rookie. But arrogance is brittle. It cracks the moment truth touches it. True confidence comes from humility, from knowing that every person has worth, no matter their age, race, or appearance. Her words were not cruel. They carried no venom. Yet they cut deeper than any insult he had ever endured. The rookie swallowed hard, unable to respond. He wanted to apologize, to explain, to undo the mockery he had spat in her direction earlier. But words failed him. His tongue, once so eager to boast, now felt heavy in his mouth. The judge nodded in agreement. That is why she is my mentor. That is why I respect her above all. And that is why anyone who cannot see her worth has no place calling themselves a lawyer. The courtroom buzzed with whispers again. Some shook their heads at the rookie, others smirked at his humiliation. He kept his eyes down, wishing the earth would open beneath him. This was not the triumph he had envisioned. This was not the day his name would be remembered for brilliance. Instead, he was remembered for arrogance, for mocking the very woman the judge himself revered. The revelation was complete, and the young lawyer's pride shattered into pieces that could never be gathered again. And yet, though he didn't realize it in that moment, this crushing humiliation was only the beginning of the lesson that would change his life. The air in the courtroom grew heavier with each passing second. The rookie lawyer sat rigid in his seat, his papers trembling faintly in his hands. His mouth was dry, his heart pounding so loud he thought the whole room could hear it. The revelation had already humiliated him, but what came next would cut even deeper. The judge leaned forward, resting his hands on the bench. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, locked on the young lawyer. The silence stretched, so complete that even the hum of the ceiling fan seemed to fade. Then the judge spoke, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority that silenced every whisper. "Stand up, counselor." The rookie swallowed hard. His legs felt like stone, but he forced himself to rise, clutching his papers as if they might shield him. The judge studied him for a moment before continuing. "You came into this courtroom today with confidence," the judge said. "That in itself is not wrong. Every lawyer must have confidence. But what you displayed out there," he gestured toward the doors, "was not confidence. It was arrogance. And arrogance, young man, has no place in the practice of law." The words landed like blows. The rookie's face flushed red, but he couldn't look away. His pride begged him to defend himself, to say something clever, but deep down he knew there was no defense. The judge's voice grew stronger, echoing off the high walls. "Do you know what this profession demands of you? Not brilliance alone. Not clever words or sharp suits. It demands respect. Respect for the law, for your clients, for your colleagues, and most importantly, for every human being who walks through those doors. The moment you forget that, you are no longer serving justice. You are serving only yourself." The courtroom was silent, every ear tuned to his words. Even seasoned lawyers shifted in their seats, reminded of lessons they themselves had once forgotten. The judge turned his gaze briefly toward Mrs. James. His voice softened. "This woman taught me when I was just like you, hungry, ambitious, and far too proud. She told me that the law without compassion is nothing but paper and ink. That if I ever raised myself by stepping on another, I would not rise at all, but sink." Mrs. James nodded gently, her expression calm, as if she had heard this truth countless times before. The judge's eyes returned to the rookie. "And yet, here you are, mocking the very person who gave me the wisdom to sit in this chair today. You judged her by her age, by her appearance, by assumptions you had no right to make. Tell me, counselor, if you treat strangers with such disrespect, how will you treat the powerless clients who depend on you? How will you treat the very people the law is meant to protect?" The rookie's lips parted, but no words came. His throat ached with the weight of shame. Every eye in the courtroom was on him. He felt small, smaller than he had ever felt in his life. His arrogance, once a shield, now suffocated him. The judge continued, his voice now both stern and compassionate. The courtroom is not your stage for pride. It is not a place to inflate your ego. It is a place of service. Humility is not weakness, young man, it is strength. Only when you respect others can you truly serve justice. The rookie lowered his head, the papers in his hand slipping slightly as his fingers lost their grip. His vision blurred, not with anger, but with the sting of humiliation that cut deeper than any criticism he had ever received. Mrs. James finally spoke, her voice calm yet resonant. "I have seen many like you," she said, her eyes resting on him with neither malice nor pity. Young, eager, blinded by the shine of their own ambition. But the law humbles everyone eventually. Better it humbles you now in this room, than when someone's life depends on it. Her words pierced him more than the judge's rebuke. They weren't cruel, they were true. And that truth was heavier than any punishment. The judge leaned back in his chair, letting the silence return once more. The rookie remained standing, his head bowed, his arrogance crumbled to dust. For the first time in his life, he truly understood that knowledge and pride meant nothing without respect. The lesson was seared into him, not in textbooks, not in lectures, but in front of a room full of people whose eyes bore witness to his downfall. This was no longer just a trial of law, it had become a trial of character. And the verdict was already clear. Arrogance had failed him, and humility was the only path forward. The silence that followed the judge's words was heavier than the gavel itself. The rookie lawyer stood frozen in place, his face flushed, his heart thundering in his chest. His carefully ironed suit, his polished shoes, his expensive briefcase, all the things he thought made him powerful, suddenly felt meaningless. He wanted to shrink into the floor, to disappear from the sea of eyes locked on him. The courtroom, usually a place of quiet focus, was now alive with unspoken energy. Whispers began to ripple from one side to the other, like wind stirring leaves. "Did you hear what the judge said?" someone murmured. "He mocked her? Judge's mentor?" Another whispered in disbelief. "Arrogant fool. He just ruined himself." The rookie could hear every hushed word, though no one was speaking directly to him. The shame burned hotter than fire. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stand still, but his body betrayed him. His fingers trembled, his shoulders sagged, and his once proud posture collapsed into something that looked small, broken, exposed. Across the room Mrs. James sat quietly, her calm presence a mirror to his storm. She had not raised her voice, had not demanded revenge. She didn't need to. Her dignity was louder than his insults had ever been. Every person in the room could see the difference between the two, the silent strength of wisdom against the loud emptiness of arrogance. The judge tapped his gavel lightly, not to silence the whispers but to draw attention back. "This is not a theater," he said firmly. "Let us proceed." But though the case moved forward, no one's mind was on the legal arguments anymore. They were on him, the rookie who had ridiculed a woman who commanded the respect of the highest judge in the room. His reputation, barely born, had been crushed before it could even grow. When it was finally his turn to speak, he rose on shaky legs. His voice, which only hours earlier had been sharp and full of self-importance, cracked under the weight of humiliation. He stumbled through his sentences, fumbling his notes, his arguments weak and scattered. Each mistake drew more whispers, more sidelong glances. He could feel the pity of some, the scorn of others. To him both were unbearable. The opposing lawyer delivered their arguments smoothly, their calm confidence only highlighting his unraveling. Even the jury exchanged looks of quiet judgment, as though they had already reached their own conclusions, not about the case but about him. When the session ended, he packed his papers with clumsy hands. He avoided eye contact, but he could feel their stares burning into his back. As he hurried to leave, he caught fragments of the conversations around him. "He won't last long in this field. Arrogance never wins. Maybe this will teach him something." Each word was a dagger. He had entered the courthouse expecting to build a name for himself. Instead, he had become a cautionary tale. Outside the courtroom, he leaned against the wall, his breath uneven. The marble pillars that had once seemed like monuments to his future now loomed over him like cold reminders of his fall. He thought of the smirk he had worn that morning, the way he had mocked Mrs. James in the lobby, the way he had laughed at her silence. The memory now twisted like a knife in his gut. And worst of all, he knew everyone else remembered it too. The humiliation wasn't private, it was public, seared into the memory of every person who had been there. His career, his pride, his carefully crafted image, shattered in a single day. He wanted to run, to never step foot in that building again. But deep inside, beneath the shame and the bruised ego, a small voice whispered that maybe this was the lesson he needed most. For now, though he could not see the wisdom in it, all he could feel was the crushing weight of humiliation, a punishment harsher than any verdict. And yet the story was not over. The evening sun dipped low, painting the courthouse steps in fading gold as the rookie lawyer stumbled outside. His polished shoes, once gleaming with pride, now felt heavy against the stone pavement. He loosened his tie, his chest tight, his breath uneven. All day he had walked with his chin high, but now his head hung low. The whispers, the judge's words, Mrs. James's calm silence, they replayed in his mind like echoes in a cavern. He sat on the steps, his briefcase resting at his side, and buried his face in his hands. For the first time in years he felt truly small. His pride, the thing he clung to like armor, had been torn apart in front of everyone. He thought of the way he had mocked her, the smugness in his tone, the cruelty in his words. Each memory struck him harder than the last. As the courthouse emptied, lawyers and clerks walked past. Some spared him a glance, pity in their eyes, or worse, amusement. He wished they wouldn't look at him at all. He wished the ground would open and swallow him whole. And then soft footsteps approached. He lifted his head. Mrs. James stood there, her posture straight, her handbag tucked under her arm. The same calmness she carried inside the courtroom was still with her. She looked at him, not with anger, not with smugness, but with a quiet dignity that pierced him more deeply than any insult could. He scrambled to his feet, his voice breaking. "Ma'am? He stopped, his throat tightening. Words, usually so easy for him, now felt impossible. Mrs. James studied him for a moment before speaking. "You thought mocking me would raise you higher," she said gently. "But arrogance only makes a man fall." His eyes stung. He shook his head quickly. "I was wrong. I didn't know who you were." She raised a hand, stopping him. "It should not matter who I am. Respect is not given because of titles or power. It is given because we are all human." The rookie's chest ached with shame. He lowered his head. "You're right," he whispered. "I was foolish. I thought my suit, my words, my confidence, I thought that was enough. But today I learned it means nothing without respect. I embarrassed myself, but worse, I disrespected you. I am truly sorry." Mrs. James's gaze softened. She stepped closer, her voice calm but firm. "Apology is the first step. Change is the next. If you wish to be a lawyer worth remembering, learn humility. Learn to listen. The law is not about proving yourself clever. It is about serving others with justice." The rookie nodded, his throat tight, tears threatening to fall. "I promise. I will do better. I will remember this day for the rest of my life." She gave him a small smile, the kind that carried wisdom earned over decades. "Good. Then perhaps today was not your end, but your beginning." With that, she turned and walked down the steps, her figure steady and graceful in the evening light. He watched her until she disappeared into the crowd, her words echoing in his heart. He sat back down on the steps, staring at the courthouse doors. His humiliation had been public, his arrogance shattered. But in its place, something new stirred: humility, resolve, and the faint spark of becoming a man worthy of the title lawyer. For the first time he realized the courtroom wasn't his stage. It was a place where people's lives hung in the balance, where dignity mattered more than pride, where respect was the foundation of justice. And though the day had broken him, it had also begun to rebuild him. The rookie lawyer had entered that morning seeking admiration. He left that evening carrying something far greater, a lesson that would shape not just his career but the man he would become. The next morning, the rookie lawyer didn't wake with the same pride he had carried the day before. He sat at the edge of his bed, staring at his reflection in the mirror. His suit hung on the chair beside him, the same one he had worn with arrogance into the courthouse. Now it looked different, less like armor and more like a reminder of his mistake. His face, once full of self-importance, now carried lines of humility he had never noticed before. As he walked through the city toward the courthouse again, the whispers followed him. Some colleagues smirked, recalling his humiliation. Others gave him pitying looks. A few, however, nodded slightly as if they respected him for showing up at all. He felt every glance, every whisper, but instead of fueling his pride, it humbled him further. Inside the courthouse he took his seat quietly. No grand entrance, no smug remarks, no attempts to draw attention. He listened as older lawyers argued their cases, studying not just their words but their patience, their respect toward everyone in the room. He realized how much he had ignored before, too consumed with his own image to notice the real craft of law. During a recess, he noticed Mrs. James in the hallway. She was speaking with a young clerk, offering advice with the same calm patience she had shown him. For a moment he hesitated, unsure if he should approach her again. But then he remembered her words. Apology is the first step, change is the next. He walked over slowly, his voice soft. "Good morning, Mrs. James." She looked at him, her eyes steady but not unkind. "Good morning," she replied. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "Not just for accepting my apology, but for teaching me something I should have known from the start. Yesterday was the hardest day of my life. But it was also the most important." Her lips curved into a faint smile. Then it was not wasted. From that day forward he carried himself differently. He no longer mocked the janitors or dismissed clerks as invisible. He greeted them with respect. He no longer strutted in the hallways. He walked quietly, observing more than speaking. In court he chose his words carefully, not to sound clever but to serve his clients with honesty. The change did not go unnoticed. Some whispered less, some whispered more, but soon the judge himself began to see the difference. He wasn't perfect, humility was not learned in a single day, but each mistake became a chance to grow instead of another excuse for arrogance. Weeks later the judge called him to chambers. The rookie entered nervously, unsure why he had been summoned. The judge studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You have been quiet lately," the judge said. "Yes, Your Honor," the rookie replied carefully. "I've been trying to listen more than I speak." The judge nodded. "Good. That is a start. You made a fool of yourself, but you also had the courage to face it. Not many do. If you keep learning, perhaps one day you will earn the kind of respect you once tried to demand." The rookie bowed his head, gratitude swelling in his chest. "I hope so, sir. I don't want to be remembered for arrogance. I want to be remembered for justice." The judge leaned back, a faint smile touching his lips. "Then keep listening to Mrs. James. She still has much to teach if you are willing to learn." And with that, the rookie left the chambers not as a broken man, but as someone rebuilding, brick by brick, mistake by mistake, lesson by lesson. Part 9 was not about his humiliation. It was about the quiet transformation that followed. The part no one applauded, no one posted about, no one gossiped over. But it was the part that mattered most. The long, slow, patient climb from arrogance to humility, from pride to purpose. Years passed, and the courthouse that had once been the stage of the rookie lawyer's humiliation became the ground where he built his redemption. The sharp-tongued young man who had mocked an elderly woman no longer existed. In his place stood someone different, a lawyer who carried himself not with arrogance but with quiet resolve. He no longer chased admiration with flashy words or polished shoes. Instead, he earned it with patience, respect, and an unwavering commitment to justice. His colleagues began to notice. The same people who once whispered about his downfall now spoke of his growth. "He listens," they said. "He doesn't treat clients like cases, he treats them like people." But the true transformation was not seen in his reputation. It was seen in how he worked. When poor families walked into his office, nervous and uncertain, he welcomed them with warmth, explaining every detail of their case in words they could understand. When junior clerks stumbled through mistakes, he corrected them with kindness instead of scorn. Even the janitors and guards who had once been invisible to him now received his daily greetings and gratitude. One evening, after a long day in court, he visited Mrs. James. She was older now, her hair fully white, her steps slower. But her eyes carried the same strength, the same wisdom that had once humbled him. She welcomed him into her modest home, and as they sat at the kitchen table, he told her what she meant to him. "You saved me," he said softly. "That day in court I thought my career had ended. But really it was the day it began. You tore down my pride and showed me what the law truly is. Everything I am now, everything I hope to become, I owe to you." Mrs. James smiled, her hands folded in her lap. "No, son. You owe it to yourself. I only showed you a mirror. You chose to change." Her words stayed with him. Years later, when she passed away, the judge himself delivered a speech honoring her. The once rookie lawyer sat in the front row, tears in his eyes, remembering the gaze that had cut through his arrogance and rebuilt him into the man he had become. And as time moved forward, he stepped into a new role, not just as a lawyer but as a mentor. Young attorneys entered his office with the same pride he once carried, and he saw himself in their eager, arrogant faces. But instead of mocking them or letting them stumble blindly, he shared his story. He told them of the day he was humbled, of the woman who taught him that the law without compassion is nothing. At first, some laughed, thinking it was just a tale. But when they saw the sincerity in his eyes, the weight of his words, they listened. Slowly they learned the same lesson he had once resisted. Respect is not optional, it is the very foundation of justice. In time he became known not as the man who had once been humiliated, but as the man who carried forward Mrs. James's legacy. His cases were not famous for drama or spectacle, but for fairness and integrity. Clients trusted him, judges respected him, and younger lawyers looked to him for guidance. One day years later, as he stood at the courthouse steps, a young clerk asked him, "Sir, how did you become the lawyer everyone admires?" He paused, his gaze drifting to the steps where he had once sat with his face in his hands, broken by shame. He smiled faintly, his voice steady. "By first becoming the lawyer everyone mocked. Arrogance taught me nothing. Humility taught me everything." The sun set behind the courthouse, casting a golden glow across its pillars. He turned and walked inside, no longer seeking to prove himself, but ready to serve. And so, the rookie who had once ridiculed an elderly woman became the man who taught generations to honor her wisdom. Her legacy lived on, not through her own words alone, but through the life he lived after learning to listen.